Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about investments, investment properties, kind of how to calculate things like cap rate and returns, and kind of how to talk to investors. So, the most important thing is to realize that there are a number of different investment properties and classes of properties, right? So when we're talking about residential real estate, we basically have single family properties, multifamily properties, condos, and co-ops. And again, condos and co-ops can both be investment properties. There are some co-ops with an unlimited sublet policy from day one, and so some of those can work out to be a really, really good investment. There are also mixed use buildings, commercial buildings, all these different things. But we're really going to be focusing on the different types of residential properties that can be investments, and how to kind of look at them and how to look at if it's a good investment or not. So um, the most important thing, and again, some of you are in Opsidian, you're working with investors, some of you have friends who are looking to potentially invest things. The most important thing is to have an upfront conversation with whoever you're working with to get a better sense of what they're looking for in terms of an immediate investment and an immediate return, as well as what they're looking for in the long run. And when we're talking about these different types of investors, they kind of go into three different categories. And again, this is a very kind of black and white way of looking at it, but you really have to get a sense of what they're looking to do. So at kind of the shortest term, we have people who would be considered flippers, right? I want to buy something at a very low price and sell it for more money. And oftentimes that means doing things to the property, right? Maybe getting a tenant out, maybe renovating, maybe doing things like that. But they're looking to buy, today and sell in 6 months or something like that. There's medium term investors, and that's something that we would kind of classify as value added, right? They're looking to maybe kind of reconfigure a property, reposition it is a big term that they use. They might buy a building with 10 units, over time as the leases come up, renovate one, and still kind of exact some sort of return while they're sitting on the property. But again, with the idea that maybe in 2 to 3 years, and again, it could be a year, but they're going to kind of flip it and change it and make some money for selling it, and they're adding value to the property. There's also the long-term investors, right? And these can either be appreciation or income investors. Again, it could be a mix of the two. And that's more of someone who's looking to buy something, hold it for a longer period of time, as the name kind of implies, and then hopefully sell it for more money. Again, if you look at people who maybe bought townhouses in Brooklyn, let's say in Bedside, 20 years ago, and they still own it now, right? That might have been worth $200,000 or $300,000. It's now worth 2 million, right? But that took some time to build that. Maybe they're investing in gentrifying neighborhoods, developing neighborhoods, whatever you want to call it, and they're not looking to just get in and flip it, but they want to hold it and grow with the neighborhood and things like that. So at the beginning of the conversation with whoever you're working with, obviously neighborhood, price are important things, but the kind of deeper questions are, how long are you looking to hold this property, and what is your expected rate of return? And again, we'll look at return from two different kind of viewpoints and things like that. So one thing, and again, this is extremely, I think, hard for some people to grasp, right? But for many investors, the numbers for investing in New York City don't make sense because they might be used to investing someplace else, right? Investing in Pittsburgh, investing in, Boca, investing in California somewhere, right? And because of A, the entry price, and B, the fact that so many people want to buy in New York City, the return numbers oftentimes don't make sense to certain investors, right? Because they're used to getting a return of 10%, 15% on their real estate investments, right? And that can be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to get in New York City for many projects. For flippers, it's difficult because there are fairly high closing costs in New York, right? On the buyer side and on the seller side, we've got the transfer taxes, which start at 1.875 and go up, the broker's fees and things like that, attorney's fees, insurance, mortgage recording fees, all of these things can add up. And so for people who are looking to make a quick profit, yes, there are places you can buy and flip and make good money. But I usually tell people, if you're going to sell something, it costs between 8 and 10% to sell it. So you need to make sure you're making more than that to get your money out and to get your value out. So when we're looking at investments, right, we're looking at something called a cap rate or capitalization rate. And that kind of looks at when we're investing a certain amount of money, how much money is being generated, right? And in terms of residential real estate, this is looking at basically our net operating income. So what our income is minus our expenses divided by the purchase price, right? And many investors are going to be using financing, using different tools and things like that. But when we're comparing, property A to property B, I just pretend like it's a cash buy, right? Like I just say, okay, if you spend X dollars on this, what are you going to get? And they probably have their own, metrics. They have their own ways of calculating this. But it's important for us to remember that everyone has their own kind of rate that they need to get, right? And so we're going to just do an example of this, right? Lori wants to buy an investment property in Soho. She found a condo that is asking 1.2 million and it would rent for $6,200 a month. The common charges are $675 and the taxes are $950 per month. What would the capitalization rate be? So again, what we're looking at is income minus expenses, times 12, so we're looking at it on a yearly term, divided by the purchase price. So in this case, the expenses every month are 950 plus 675. We're taking that off of the rental rate, which is 6,200, dividing it by the purchase price. So again, we're getting 45.50 is what we're clearing every month times 12 divided by the purchase price. So the cap rate is 0.0455, or in a percentage, it's 4.55%. So that's a cap rate, right? And now the question is that a good rate? Is that a bad rate? What is it, right? So it's very difficult to say because, again, every investor is looking for something different. What I say is people want as high a rate of return as possible, right? If you're investing money, you want to make as much as you can. So what is reasonable? And again, when I'm working with investors, and I have a couple who bought in multiple properties in Manhattan and Brooklyn, they tend to be okay and find that between a 3 and 4% return on about $1 million investment is standard, right? That is something that you can find in a lot of different scenarios. If you find 5% on that cap rate, that tends to be good. And again, the reason that I say that a lot of investors are like, wow, this is too low, are because, again, you can look at things maybe in New Jersey, maybe upstate New York. You can find things at 8 to 13%, right? You can find higher rates, 10%, 6%, and things like that. And so the return is usually correlated to a couple things, right? So risk, if the property values are going to decline, again, even though we've been hit a little bit with coronavirus, property values in Manhattan have remained fairly stable. And in Brooklyn, they've actually gone up in a lot of neighborhoods. So there's not as much risk, right? We have ups and downs, but they're not as they're not as extreme as you might find them in other neighborhoods, other places and things like that. You're also looking at income, right? How much money is coming in versus what we're renting it for, right? And the way I think about it is, if you're investing in, let's say, an apartment or a 2-family home or something like that, right? You want to get as much as you can on a monthly basis and pay as little as you can on your expenses and things like that. And that's what determines your income. And so the other thing is appreciation, right? What I buy it for today and what it's worth tomorrow, what it's worth in a year, in 2 years, in 10 years, right? And so if you look at these things all together, New York is not too risky of a market. The income is usually relatively stable, and appreciation, and this is looking at it basically from World War II to today. Prices tend to double every 10 years. Again, that's definitely slowed down a bit, but we still are seeing fairly reasonable appreciation. So New York tends to be a place where it's a stable market, so the cap rates are lower. Again, if you're investing in a place where it's not as stable of a market, the rates might be higher because, again, prices are a little bit lower. You might get a little bit better of a return. So a couple things to consider and to think about, right? So, one thing, and again, many of you who are on Opcity or on some of these lead sources have probably gotten people who've called on foreclosures, short sales, REOs, real estate owned properties, and things like that. And so it's very important for you guys to have a distinction between short sales, foreclosures, or REOs. So again, a foreclosure or an REO is when a property is owned by and then sold directly by the bank, right? So instead of a seller, instead of Jason selling my apartment, Chase Bank, who had the mortgage on the apartment and took possession back, is selling it, right? And these can happen with or without occupants, right? Someone might be a holdover tenant, and they're selling it with that person in there, right? The person hasn't been evicted yet. Maybe they're not. Maybe they've moved out, but usually it's not what the owner wanted to do, right? Maybe they gave it back, but the property is entirely owned by the bank, and they are the person selling it. There may or may not be a broker involved. There may or may not be an auction involved, and we'll talk about auctions a little bit later. But the timeline tends to be quick, like a regular sale, right? We have an agent up in the Larchmont office who specializes in REOs, and so right now, because there are no evictions, they're not happening. But he has a relationship with a number of banks. The banks give him properties and they sell them, right? And he sells them for them. And so it's a similar process to if I was selling my property, if you were selling a property for a client of yours, it can be quick like a regular sale. A short sale is a different type of sale, right? It's when the owner is attempting to sell the property that they're either inhabiting or that they hold the title on. And it's being sold for less than any liens on the property, right? And usually those liens are either back taxes or a mortgage, right? So let's say, again, someone bought a house for $500,000. They took a $400,000 loan out. The market crashed. The property is only worth $350,000 now. And so they're trying to sell it for $350,000, which is less than the $400,000 that they owe. And again, that's where the term short comes in, because it's short of what they owe on the property. So those sales are a two-step process, right? You have to go through the process of getting an accepted offer with the seller, getting a contract together and things like that. But part of that contract says that the bank or the loan holder, the lien holder, whoever that is, has to agree to the sale as well. And so that process takes longer, and they have to agree to it, release the liens and things like that. So again, these are two, similar but different types of sales. Many times, both, and especially short sales and REOs will only consider cash offers, right? They will only take cash offers. And why is that? Well, they want to get rid of these properties quickly. In the case of a short sale, they might be losing the property, the owner. In the case of an REO, they might just say, we don't want to pay this monthly maintenance. We don't want to pay these things every month. And so they want to get rid of it more quickly. Again, maybe it's the condition. Maybe it's an awful condition and it's not mortgageable, right? That no one can get a loan on it. So it's really important that whenever we're going into a situation with these types of properties, we're asking questions and we're really reaching out to the listing agent, to the auction house, whoever it is, to get as much information as possible. We'll talk about that a little bit further down the line as well. So auctions, right? So you might find a property that's at auction, and there are a number of auction houses across New York State and New York City who sell properties. And again, auctions are more difficult for a number of reasons. And this is a little acronym that I came up with that I like. So auctions, artificially increase cost, right? You're putting your buyer into an environment where there are people who are kind of bidding at the same time, right? So it's competition between them. Again, why do we do auctions? Because it increases the price that people get, right? Emotions come into play. It's people who are bidding against each other. I went to an auction with a client once. We had I think the property was asking about 800,000. The comps were about $1 million. And I think we bid 1.1, which was our max. And I think it went for like 1.6 million. And there were no comps whatsoever that anywhere near had the prices near there. But again, people just get in the heat of the moment. They start bidding each other up. Oftentimes they're uncertain terms, right? You don't know what's going on in terms of things that are owed, what's happening with the property. Sometimes you can't get in and things like that. The commissions aren't always paid, right? Sometimes they're paid by the bidder. Sometimes there's actually a fee that's paid, a 20% buyer's premium or something like that. So you're paying more than you would if it was a normal sale. Sometimes there's no commission given to you as an agent either. And again, these are questions that we have to ask. Taxes can be in arrears, and usually those taxes are paid by whoever the buyer is. Income may not be guaranteed because holdover tenants, right? Someone could be living in that property. And again, usually it's disclosed up front if there is a holdover tenant, if someone needs to be evicted and things like that. But that can stop people from being able to actually get use of this property that they're buying or the investment that they're trying to put people in. Ownership can be in doubt. Again, these are things that the attorneys will be looking into. And again, and nice in theory, hard in practice. They're just, they're more difficult. Again, that's not to say there aren't good values that can be found at auction or there are ways to do it, but it's another layer of complication in your process of helping people find stuff. Two other kind of important things to know, especially when you're dealing with multifamily properties, are rent stabilized and rent controlled units. So there's a big difference, and the easiest way I like to think about this is rent control is on a person, right? A person is rent controlled. Rent stabilization is on an apartment. The apartment is rent stabilized. And again, this difference is kind of important. So basically, rent control went into people who were living in the apartment since July 1st, 1971. The building was built before 1947. Basically, it helped stabilize the city, and it helped with people who were staying here and not having to be evicted because the property prices were going up and things like that. So tenants are rent controlled, right? My grandmother was in an apartment. This isn't true, but my grandmother was in an apartment in the West Village. She's paying $400 a month. She is rent controlled, right? When my grandmother leaves that apartment, the apartment is not rent controlled, right? Something will happen. And again, what happens is a totally different subject, which we can talk about later. It usually becomes rent stabilized, but let's not get into that detail right now. But when she leaves, the apartment is not rent controlled. Something happens, right? Rent stabilization applies to the apartments, and it applies to buildings of 6 or more units constructed between 47 and 74. It also applies to a lot of buildings that were built more recently, where the people were getting tax incentives, right? So you can find high-rise buildings across, Chelsea, across Long Island City that are rent stabilized. So once you're in that apartment, your rent can only go up by a certain amount year over year. Again, rent control, the amount goes up very, very low. Rent stabilization between 1% and 3%, things like that. So once someone leaves a rent stabilized unit, right? Like let's say I'm living in a rent stabilized unit, I move out, the apartment can increase in value in terms of what they're charging for the rent. And sometimes the apartment can be brought out of rent stabilization. But again, it really depends on the situation. It's a very complex process to bring something out of rent control or rent stabilization. You have to basically submit a lot of forms. There's a lot of things. There are rent control guidelines and things like that. But again, you will find units with rent stabilized and rent controlled tenants. That's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because those, sorry, 1 second. Those properties have upside potentially, right? And again, depending on what happens, you can definitely increase the value of some of those apartments. Again, there are different tactics which multifamily buyers will use. Basically, if you combine a rent stabilized and a rent, a free market unit, you can sometimes, again, if you take two studios, mash them together, you can get a bigger apartment together and be free market there. Again, there are different techniques and things like that. So we won't go into really the general things, but what I'd like to say is that rent stabilized and rent controlled apartments don't necessarily make something a bad investment. And in many cases, it can actually make it better because the purchase price is going to be lower because of those tenants. One more term, which again, you might see thrown around, or you might encounter someone who's an investor who's doing what we call a 1031 exchange. What these exchanges are that they allow people to defer capital gains on investment properties when reinvesting the proceeds into a like investment, right? And so, as we mentioned at the beginning, condos, co-ops, multifamilies, commercial, mixed use, all of those qualify as like investments, right? So you might have someone who owns a multifamily who sells it and buys a condo, totally fine, right? There are different kind of there are different standards in terms of timelines and things like that, but just as a very easy example, right? Let's say you bought property A for $500,000 in 2005 and you rented it out for the last 15 years, right? Well, in today's market, it's worth $1 million. So if you were to sell it today, right, the difference would be $500,000. And so you would pay capital gains on $500,000. So let's just say, you're a corporation that owns it and you have to pay 20%, right? So you're paying $100,000 in capital gains just for selling that property, right? Well, with a 1031 exchange, if you decide, hey, I want to take that money that I made and And basically, usually you have to do all the money. But we can talk about that separately as well. But let's say you decide you want to buy property B for $1 million, right? So you can do that, right? You sell A for, you sell A for $1 million, you buy B for $1 million. You don't have to pay anything in capital gains, right? And there are certain timelines with this, right? So after you sell property A, you have 45 days to identify properties that you might want to buy with this 1031 exchange. And you have 180 days from the closing of property A to the closing of property B to do it. So you have to go through a company that's a 1031 exchange. There are a number of lawyers. Again, we've got to have people to do this. But what it does is it really helps people to save money that they might otherwise have to pay in taxes. I will use an example of this. I had a client who owned a Soho co-op, right? That was purchased by the husband for $50,000 in 1968. We sold it for $3 million, right? And so the capital gains that she would have had to pay were about $1 million in capital gains. Because it had been rented for the last 3 years, she was able to do a 1031 exchange, use all that money to buy and then renovate a property in Brooklyn, and she paid nothing in capital gains on that sale. So even though they made about almost $3 million, they didn't pay anything in capital gains. And those gains are deferred until they go and they sell the property in Brooklyn, right? And when they sell that, they will pay capital gains on that sale. So what it's doing is allowing an investor more funds to invest and more time to invest property and make more money. And again, it helps kind of spurn the real estate development and the economy. Excuse me. So again, we're just going to talk and we're going to kind of look at a couple different properties and just get a sense of how to do cap rates and how to kind of find some investments. But your job as an agent is to always get all of the information, right? You have to ask questions and get clarification. So that's on a number of different things, but especially when you're working with someone, you always want to find out what are the terms of the sale, right? What is the seller looking for? Are they taking cash? Are they taking financing? Again, you might have someone, and I tend to say that this tends to happen on these crazy low price properties, right? There might be something totally wrong with it, right? There might be, there's no access, there's no water, and the roof's collapsing, right? Well, that sale probably needs cash. And so you need to make sure that you know that before you send it to your investor. The other thing is commission, right? What percentage are you offering to a buyer's broker? Especially in the case of auctions, sometimes short sales, they're not paying us a full commission, right? Or they're not paying us, what we usually would charge someone to sell. So, you have to look into that. You also have to look into encumbrances on the property, right? Are there taxes, are there bills, are there liens and things like that? We have an example of an agent she had clients who are investors, they're buying a 2-family. The tenants stopped paying rent and they can't be evicted right now. So they're still in limbo about when they're closing, right? So you need to know about these kind of things and if they can close and things like that. So again, sometimes the seller has a title report. You can get a sense of these things. You can check out Property Shark, Acris. The attorney that they're using can run these reports and things like that. Again, this is a little bit level 2, but our job as an agent is always to get as much information as we can and ask the questions, right? Why is this so cheap? Tell me what's the history of this property. Is anything wrong with it? That's a great question to ask people because then they kind of have to disclose things to you. So, it's really important to ask all these things. So again, what we're going to do now is kind of find some good investments and just get a general sense of how we can do this, right? This is something that we can do, and we can craft this message into a mass email to send out to a neighborhood and just say, hey, there's some great buys in X neighborhood. Let me know if you're thinking about investing. I have some good cap rates of over X percentage, whatever that is, right? So I'm going to close out and I'm going to go to OLR. So just as an example, and again, this is these are things that can be done, for any neighborhood. I'm just going to let's pick Soho where I am right now, right? Let's say we have an investor looking to spend between $800,000 and $1 million, right? So what are we going to do? So again, just to keep it simple, I'm going to just look for condos, and let's see what we come up with. Okay, so 3 condos downtown in Soho under $1 million. So I know for 246 Spring Street is the Dominic Hotel. And I know this is basically not something that would have the best return because the common charges are extremely high on these properties. So I'm going to go back. Let's pick a different neighborhood. Let's try Let's try West Village and Greenwich Village. 6. Okay, here we go. So here are 6 different properties, right? Ranging from $999 all the way down to $800,000. So let me grab a piece of paper. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of start getting a sense of what these investments look like in terms of a return standpoint, right? And again, what I do is I always calculate these based on the asking price. And again, that means that there's always upward room and negotiability and stuff like that. So let's compare these 4 properties, right? So 175 West 12th Street, 6C. Alcove Studio in this building. Okay, so we've got the asking price of $800,000, right? The common charges and real estate taxes together add up to $989. And now we have to figure out what this would rent for, right? And again, we're in a very weird market with rentals right now as prices are down. Let's just check out what last rented in an Alcove Studio in the building. So you can click on the building. We can get a sense of kind of what this might have previously rented for. Again, this is a 24-hour dormant building, laundry room, live-in super and stuff like that. Internet's very slow today. Okay, so we've got 10 active rentals. Let's go to the rentals. So we're looking for an Alcove Studio, what the general price is. And again, maybe, you know, we kind of have to look and try to get a sense of this. Okay, so these are all 1 bedrooms. But we can tell that the prices are actually down. $2,500 for a West Village 1 bedroom is actually pretty good. So let's look at the inactive rentals. And again, we have a 6C. Sometimes it would have been rented in the past. So again, these Alcove Studios looks like they used to rent for about, well, these just rented. So let's say 2,300. Alcove Studio, let's see if there's a C. It's a 3-bedroom. Alcove 2,900, 2,600. So again, let's be conservative and let's just say it's going to rent for $2,400, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to do the math now. We're going to do, oops, second calculator up. Okay, so we're saying it rents for $2,400. Our costs per month are $989. So we're making $1,411 a month. We're going to multiply that by 12, 16,932. And let's say our purchase price is $800,000. Okay, so our cap rate here is 0.0211. So it's 2.11%. So again, on an $800,000 purchase, that's not something that's great, right? It's fine, but it's nothing too crazy. So let's and again, prime Manhattan, prime places, the cap rate's probably gonna be a little bit lower. So let's go back to our search results and see what the next one is. Let's pick a different one. Okay, let's try this Thompson Street one. So this is 950,000, 718 and 718 plus 826, 1544. Let's get a sense of what this would rent for. Again, it's got a little outdoor space. I think these rent for in the 3,000 range, if I remember correctly. 12 active rentals. Wow, there's a lot in the market. I think this is MA, it's called. Okay, so it's not, ME is a studio, asking 3,000. Let's see, but didn't rent. Let's see what the last rentals were. This one's a little bit different, but let's just guess. It's a 1-bedroom. I think it's a 1-bedroom. Let's say, let's go back and see. Is it a 1-bedroom or is it a studio? One bedroom. So, okay, let's just say 35 to be a reasonable number. So this 35, oops, minus 1544 times 12 divided by 950. 2.47%. So 0.0247, so 2.47%. So again, to me, not a very great investment, right? It's reasonable, and again, it's just ways of comparing them. So you can kind of keep going through these. You can get a sense. Again, it's in the same building. This is a one bedroom in that Century Towers building. So you can compare different properties and get a sense of what the return is going to be, and give that to the investor. Again, right now, the unfortunate thing is that rental prices are down, though sale prices are down a little bit. So it's really a balancing act between those two things to see what and how and where you're going to get the best property value from. We can do a similar thing with multifamily properties, and again, we can compare them. So let's just do the same thing. I'm going to go to Manhattan buildings for sale. Again, the price point here is probably going to be a little bit more. Let's do 10 million. Let's do Soho also first and see if that works. So with these multifamily properties, or again, some of them are going to be single family, right? So you've got these two are single families. There's not much in Soho. Let me do the West Village because we want more. We can kind of get a sense of what these would rent for and things like that. So again, 223 West 13th Street. So it's currently configured as 4 free market units, 3 one bedroom and a duplex, renovated townhouse include cellar, yada, yada. So you've got all this information, right? And so a lot of times what you'll be able to find is you'll be able to find what's called a setup, right? And that will have information on the building. In OLR, usually you have to email them. So I could email Matthew and I could say, hi Matthew, is it possible to send a setup? Are the units? What he can do is he can give us a sense of things, right? So let's just pretend. Let's say he says, apartment, there's A, B, and C. A is 5,000, B is 4,000, C is 3,500, something like that, right? So what we can do then is we can look at the expenses of the building versus what we're getting in income. So again, in the case of a townhouse, the price are probably, again, in Manhattan, high to the point where the return is not going to be crazy, right? So again, let's say that based on the one I just gave you, we're at 12,500 a month in terms of income. What are our taxes here? So it's 47,500. So I'm going to multiply it by 12, subtract the taxes, $47,592. And the other thing you have to factor in is, the other costs, right? Having a super, garbage, water, all that stuff. And again, usually these brokers, so Matthew will have a setup that says estimated water, estimated all these things. So again, let's just say it's another $12,000 a year for those things, $1,000 a month, which is probably pretty low, right? So we're clearing $90,000, and we're going to divide that by 9,450, 1, 2, 3, right? So we basically have a less than a 1% return. And again, on a lot of these properties, because the the purchase prices are so high, the return is not going to be great, right? A lot of times these are more designed for someone to come in. Again, this is on a prime block on 13th Street. Someone might come in, renovate it, make it into a single family, things like that. So a lot of times you'll find a bit better return in Brooklyn. And again, you can calculate these cap rates. A lot of times in the information from the broker, they'll actually have the cap rate in there as well. One other place that you might want to look is LoopNet. And again, LoopNet tends to actually just give you the cap rate, right? So if you have someone looking for a multifamily property to buy, so we'll put Soho, multifamily, Soho, let's do 101. Zip code for Soho. And we're just looking for multifamilies, right? LoopNet will have things that are available, right? So 178 Prince Street, 22 million 4-unit apartment building, 12,000 square feet. I'm going to take the boundary away, but this is another place that you can look for these kind of multifamily investment properties. A lot of times, again, 14.5 million, 4.62 cap rates, right? So they're giving it to you off the bat. And again, these cap rates are based on the asking price. They're based on numbers that they have. And again, they'll usually have, let me see if there's one in here. They'll often have what's called a setup in here. Here you go, marketing brochure, right? So you can download this and you can get a sense of what all these properties rent for. Again, each of the units, what's free market, what's not free market, right? For FM means free market. So this building has 2 rent stabilized, the rest free market. This is what they're paying, what the monthly rent is and stuff like that. So they're giving all these breakdowns with again, income, taxes, vacancy loss, repairs, all this stuff, right? And so they're showing you how they're calculating the cap rate. So again, another type of property, another class of property that's really worth looking into. Harvey, who's on the call, has done a number of multifamily properties, and so he's kind of an expert on that. But that is basically it for me about multifamilies and investments and condos and all that stuff. I'm going to stop the recording and we'll take some questions. So thank you guys so much.